Alright, what's going on everybody? Welcome back. My name is Alex, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys 4 tips that I think are pretty important to help you get better at combat inside of Gotham Knights. Now, you may have heard that the combat inside of this game is terrible. You may have heard things like the enemies take forever to die, I'm not doing any damage, it's taking me like 10-15 minutes just to beat down one enemy, I'm tired of hitting the same button over and over again. And all the solutions to these problems are in the game, but the game does a pretty poor job in explaining how they work. Now, we're in the Batman universe, we're using the Bat family, and everybody knows what you say about Batman. If you give him prep time, he wins every time. And that holds true with this game. Early on, it doesn't matter a whole lot. You can just kind of brute force your way through everything, but you are going to hit a point where you have to start paying attention and you have to start prepping for what you're actually trying to do. Now, with all that being said, combat tip number 1. Do not button mash. And if you're unfamiliar with button mashing means, that means that you're just hitting the buttons, there's no rhythm, you're just spamming down your attacks and just hoping for the best. That's not the way to play this game. If you're just button mashing and not timing your presses, you're going to be missing out on extra damage, you're going to be missing out on extra momentum bar, you're going to make fights last way longer, and there's also some pretty cool animations that you're going to be missing out on if you're not doing the correct timing for your attacks. Now, I've only played Red Hood, so I'm not entirely sure how the timing works for other characters, so if you need to practice the timing on your character, just go to the training dummy inside of the Belfry, practice your time strikes. I would also suggest just doing all the training exercises there. They are pretty helpful, and eventually it'll just become second nature. You won't even think about timing your presses, it'll just happen. Now, combat tip number 2 is something that I believe most people aren't interacting with, and this is probably why they're having such a hard time killing certain enemies, and that is to know your enemy. You have to know who you're fighting, you have to prepare, because later on in the game, especially in New Game Plus, if you're using the wrong things, you're gonna have a rough time. And what I mean by that is every faction that you fight in this game, they have an element that they are resilient against, and they have an element that they are weak against. Now, the game does a pretty poor job of explaining this, but if you go to your database and your guidebook, you can actually find out all the weaknesses to all the enemies. Now, taking this a step further, whenever you're inside the Belfry getting ready to go out on your patrols or whatever, especially if you're trying to do some high or very high criminal activity missions, look around the map, see who's going to be the main faction you're fighting, and make sure you have the actual right armor that gives you the proper resistance, and make sure that you have the weapons, your melee and your range, that has the right elements on it to do the most damage. And this is actually going to make a pretty big difference. Once I started doing this, everything got way easier. Now, I am playing on hard, solo, and on New Game Plus, so it's still a little bit difficult, the very high missions, but going in there with the wrong equipment is literally a death sentence. Now, to locate this page inside of your menus, you want to go to database, you want to go to profiles, and then you want to either go to villains or factions. And from here, it'll tell you the weaknesses of all the bosses that you have encountered and all the factions you have encountered. So get used to this page, and eventually you will remember everything and you won't even have to come back to this point. So make sure that you memorize this page and adjust your actual builds accordingly. Now, moving on to tip number 3, which is probably one of the most important tools that a lot of people are not using, and that is to use your smoke bombs. Now, if you don't know what the smoke bombs actually do, these are pretty much get out of jail free cards when you use them defensively. And they also give you the ability to reset any combat encounter as long as you have something to grapple onto with your grappling hook. Now, to use your smoke bomb, it's the same button as your grapple, but instead of just pressing it, you're going to hold it down. Your character's going to drop a smoke pellet on the ground, they're going to fly up to wherever you grapple to, and the enemies are going to lose track of you. Now, the smoke bomb is kind of a novelty item at the beginning of the game towards the middle of the game, but late game and New Game Plus, this game absolutely rewards you for using all of your tools, and especially late game when you're doing the very high crime activities, you don't want to die when you're doing those. So if you have to escape, if you have to get a breather, make sure that you're actually using these. And the smoke bomb also comes in handy when you have an objective to, get stealth takedowns or ambush takedowns. And later on in the game, sometimes you actually won't one-shot enemies with the takedowns and you got to get them like twice. So if that is the case, get your takedown, vanish with your smoke bomb, and rinse and repeat until you get all your objectives done. Now, these do have limited uses, but I've also never needed a smoke bomb and haven't had one. So as long as you're always doing combat, most of the time you should have smoke bombs readily available. Now, the 4th and final tip is something that I know a lot of people have been neglecting because I've seen the comments about it, and that is to upgrade your gear. whether you have to craft it, whether you find it on the ground. If you're not upgrading your gear, if you're not crafting gear that's on your level or on the enemy's level, you're gonna have a bad time. You're not going to do any damage. The gear matters, especially when you start getting 3 and 4 mod slots on your gear. This is a system that you absolutely cannot neglect. If you do, the game pretty much punishes you. And I know a lot of people came over from the Arkham series expecting the same kind of gameplay, but Batman was a god in that game from the get-go. Like, you were so powerful, but to get that same result in this game, you got to work a little bit, so upgrade your gear. And I know all of these tips were pretty basic, and to me, these kind of just came to me that they made sense. But I know for a lot of people, they're not used to playing RPGs. They're not used to having to actually invest in their characters to the point where they can't do any damage unless they actually know how things work. So hopefully this helps somebody out. Let me know in the comments down below if it did. And that's all I got for you guys today, man. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that shenanigans down below. And I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.